Hey everybody, Seth Dailey here, and I want to take a minute and talk to you about real estate pricing strategies. I just got off a phone call with one of our sellers, and we were talking about whether or not a price adjustment, a price improvement, a price correction, or price reduction, whatever words you want to use, whether or not that was necessary on their property. And in fact, it is, right? So we've measured the market, we figured out if the market is responding to our current pricing in their neighborhood, and the reality is a price adjustment is in order. And so as we were talking through that, I realized, there are a few principles when it comes to pricing a property the first time, and certainly when making a price adjustment. I wanted to share them for a quick second. So the first thing to consider in pricing a property is that buyers search in ranges. So let's pretend that we've got a property that is 340,000. So 340,000. Now you could be super precise and you could go have an appraisal done. You could say it's worth exactly 340. The reality is buyers search in ranges. And the way that I think about that is if there's a pool of buyers out there, the question is, what are the ranges that they're going to be looking in, right? So there's 300,000, there's 325, there's 350, on and on and on. The problem in considering these ranges is if somebody says, well, I want to price at 340, it's right in the middle of a range. And I'll usually say, well, at first, why don't we try something a little bit higher? Because the reality is a buyer that is looking at a house that's 340 is really looking in this range between 325 and 350. We might as well go up a little bit higher to see what activity that generates. So the first conversation, again, is buyers searching ranges. The second thing to consider is that when you're making a price adjustment, you need to figure out what drop is going to be enough of a drop to generate new activity. And there's really two schools of thought. Number one is it enough of a splash that if this was a newspaper advertisement, they say, congratulations, we're having a sale, everything in the store is 1% off. Is it enough of a splash to actually have people come in? Now, obviously, retail pricing at the mall and pricing of real estate is a little bit different, but you still need to have a number that is enough of a splash. So let's say that somebody started at 350,000 or maybe 349.9, and they said, let's do a $5,000 adjustment. Well, all right, let's think about this for a second. Would a $5,000 adjustment be enough to actually generate any new interest? The question we would ask is, do we think there's any buyers that because they saw it was priced at 349.9 and not at 345, they're like, never mind, we're not even going to go look at it? Because in theory, those would be the buyers that we're now pulling to the property. And the reality is a $5,000 adjustment in this price range wouldn't make a difference, right? We would be looking at least at $10,000 plus. There's another rule of thumb that says make sure whatever price you're pricing your property at, there's no more than a 3% gap between that number and the offer that you would accept today. Now, obviously, every seller out there would say, well, I want to get as much money as I can for the house. Of course we do. And if this seller said to me, you know what, we would accept 325 today if a buyer came in and made us an offer. If they said that, then the conversation would be, if you would accept 325 today, don't add in more than about $10,000 in buffer room and price it at around 335. Okay. Third component, you've got the buyer search and ranges. You've got the price adjustments, either pertaining to the 3% rule or this idea of how big of a price adjustment would actually make a big difference. And the third component is this. Sometimes we use retail pricing. Sometimes we price on the nines, and sometimes we price on the flat numbers. Now, what could make that decision? Well, what we know is that a lot of searches, they'll give buyers a range to search in. For example, 3 to 350, 350 to 400, so on and so forth. In a scenario like that, if I was trying to decide whether or not I should price a property at 349.9 or at 350, I actually would consider pricing it at 350. Why? Because you get both ranges. You get the buyers that are below that, between 3 and 350. You also get the buyers that are above that, from 350 to 400. Both of them show up at 350. Whereas at 349.9, you're only getting the buyers below. But now let's say they make a price adjustment, and let's say they drop down to 340 or 335. If they make that type of a price adjustment, now where do we price? Do we price at 335 even? Do we price at 340? Normally, this is when we would start to follow the retail pricing rule of pricing on the nines. So if we were going to make an adjustment to 335, we might say, let's go ahead and adjust it to 334, 900. So just a couple principles. The reality is pricing a property is quite a bit of science and quite a bit of art. And this is one of those conversations that there's no wrong answer, but there is some strategy that comes into play. Sometimes we'll make super small adjustments just to refresh a property on the market. Sometimes we'll start low and create a bidding war. Lots of strategies. If you want to have a more in-depth conversation, just reach out. Always love having these conversations, and we'll find a whiteboard that we can use for the conversation. Talk to you soon.